Hello, everyone. Welcome to well, do you see my slides? Okay, just making sure. Welcome to a talk that has been a long time in the making. You see, in the past 5 years, I spent time consulting for some of the biggest organizations in the world in terms of IT. Organizations the size of Dell, AIG, etc. And a lot of what you're going to hear in this talk is stuff that I've learned the hard way. So we're going to talk about the challenges, but also how to work around them. Just a little bit about me. My name is Osherove. I wrote a couple of books on unit testing and elastic leadership, and I'm actually doing a workshop on elastic leadership for technical leaders starting tomorrow. And some of the stuff you're going to hear in this talk is based on that material as well. Because I'm a firm believer that all technical problems are people problems. So a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about is how to look at the human perspective and try to see how we can work around some of these issues. So our agenda, we're going to talk about influence forces. How can we actually make things happen in an organization, especially when we think we cannot? We're going to talk about adoption challenges, important metrics, teams and collaborations, and pipelines, as much as we can afford. And we're going to, at each one of them, we're going to look at specific ways on how we can influence change in that specific area. But first, I want to say something really, really important. Unfortunately, this talk is probably not going to make any difference in your lives whatsoever. It's true, it's a sad fact, but really what usually happens is that you go to a conference and you listen to a talk and you learn some interesting information and you're jazzed up to maybe give it a try, and then you come back to work and you explain to all of your coworkers, man, all that stuff that I learned is so good and so cool, and everyone says, yeah, that's great, now please go back to work. And all that stuff just kind of, it stays in your head, but it's very hard to take the stuff that you learned, the stuff that you believe in, that you think is the right thing to do, and actually create something realistic from it in the real world. So a lot of this talk is about being able to change stuff in the real world, especially the stuff that you think you cannot change. For example, the environment around you. For example, can we just go to focus mode for a second? Let's see if that works. Focus mode. Can we get rid of these lights? Yordash? No, he's not there. Maybe at some point, Yordash is going to hear me and get rid of these lights, and then we can focus, because I want to get rid of the Slido stuff at the sides. So when he comes back, let him know. Okay, so this talk, one of the problems is that you think you're going to make a difference, just like I just did here. And then you realize there's nobody listening. Right? So one of the key problems with that is that we don't have a human connection. The people that work around us in the organization are the people that can actually help us. And to be able to change the behavior of people, we have to be able to understand influence forces. So influence forces. We have to understand what influences us in our actions at the local level and also at the organizational level. And through that, we can try to stop feeling stumped when we hit a wall. Because a lot of times, when we believe in a specific thing, for example, we want to create pipelines in our organization, but when we talk to our team about it, everyone agrees, but everyone just continues doing the exact same thing. We want to add automated tests, and everyone says, yeah, that's a great idea. We don't have time to do that stuff, so maybe in the next project. There are so many things that can go wrong in a large organization. And there's this really cool book that I recommend that everyone takes a look at. It's called Influencer, The Power to Change Anything. And in that book, the authors talk about the ability to make a change in the behavior of small groups, and also huge groups. Groups that are able to, for example, from tribes in Africa to gangs in New York. How do you influence and change the behavior of people in groups? Because that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about enterprise DevOps. Because DevOps is kind of this set of practices, this set of values that we want to inherit into our company, to inherit pipelines and other things. But to be able to do that, we have to be able to change things. Can we go into focus mode, Yordash? Thank you. Let's see, he came back. Let's see if it works. My demo is going to come in in a second. Let's see. Okay, thank you. Perfect. Thank you very much. So, sometimes, saddest clap in the world. But really, sometimes, when you want to make a change in an enterprise organization, that's kind of what it feels like. Is that you're trying to make something, you're trying to make it multiple times, and then suddenly it works, and nobody kind of realizes it or doesn't see a lot of value in it, but you see that there's value in it. So sometimes, your successes are going to be unknown. They're going to be maybe uncredited. But the idea is that you should be able, you can, and you should be able to change the environment around you and the behavior of people around you if you can make the personal connection or to understand why people do what they do. So one of these things that this book talks about is how do you influence the behavior of people? If you want, for example, your project to have more time to do automated testing. If you want your project to be able to invest more budgets into automation or to have more hardware or to give you permission to deploy to production. These are all behaviors that people choose to do or not to do, that people choose to allow or not to allow. And once we understand that, we can see that we can create a system on how to try to understand how to change that behavior. So the first thing we want to do is we want to find a symptom in the system. For example, a release takes too long. We want to discover the root cause. And one of the best ways to discover a root cause is to ask why 5 times, right? Why a release is taking so long? Well, the testing process takes so long. Why is the testing process taking so long? Because it's manual. Why is it manual? Because we don't have time to automate it. Why don't we have time to automate it? Etc. And for each organization, the questions and answers might be different. But once we understand some of the root causes, we can also look at core behaviors to change that. For example, if I understand that one of the root causes why I cannot spend time doing automated tests because I don't have enough people, how do I change the behavior of the people in charge of resources in my organization to change their behavior so they understand the value in providing more resources into this? So that's where I'm looking. I need a physical behavior that I can describe. A physical behavior is something that I can see. It either happens or doesn't happen. And the reason we're looking for physical behaviors, and I know it sounds kind of weird. I'm talking about enterprise DevOps, and here we're looking for physical behaviors of specific people. But when we're trying to change something, and we want to measure whether we're able to change something, that something always manifests in physical behavior or physical, something visual that you can see or describe. For example, the meeting takes too long. A person is negative in a specific way. A budget is approved or not approved. A report is visible or not visible. The pipeline is red and someone fixes it or doesn't fix it. You can actually measure. You can say it's a Boolean. It's a true or false that someone did that or not, or how many times it happened per week, per month. So we're looking for something that we can measure. And unless we're able to measure that something, we won't be able to know whether we're able to change something. So for example, when a release milestone arrives, the tech lead announces a code freeze. Now that's a behavior we want to try to prevent. So we have to understand why that behavior happens. We want to be able to move to continuous delivery, but we don't have permissions to go to the right locations. So one of the things we can do is we can look at 6 factors. And those 6 factors are personal motivation, personal ability, social motivation and ability, and structural motivation and ability. Now here's the funny part. When I was reading this book, I realized that almost all the time, we're looking at only the first 2 factors when you're trying to change people's behavior. So if I'm a big believer in unit testing and TDD, I even wrote a book about it. And I go to my team and I say, let's do unit testing in TDD. And everyone's like, yeah, sure. And then nobody does unit testing in TDD. What do I look for? What do I try to do? First of all, maybe I'll talk to a person and I'll teach them how to do it. Perfect. That's personal ability. Second is, I'll try to convince the person. It's better to do this than not to do this. Perfect. And maybe those two things are true. Maybe that person believes it's the right thing to do and knows how to do the right thing. And at that point, most of us are just stumped. We're like, okay, I convinced him or her, and they know how to do it. Now what? Why isn't it happening? And the other four are the things that we usually don't think about. And this is where the enterprise stuff comes in. You see, social motivation is how people around us drive our behavior. For example, if I'm the only person doing unit testing in a team, or when I talk about it, people laugh at me, or people that I admire think it is a crap idea, it's very likely that I'm going to stop doing it. So my motivation to continue doing it is very, very low. And if I wanted to continue doing it, I have to create a community of practice. I have to create maybe a user group or just a small meetup inside the organization, kind of like Alcoholics Anonymous. That's a perfect example of social motivation because you're struggling with a specific thing that is difficult for you, and then you have a bunch of other people you can share your pain with. So if I'm trying to implement unit testing in an organization or pipelines or whatever, and I'm the only one in my department that believes in that stuff, but then I know that there's a user group internally, and there are other departments in the organization, and each one of them has their own kind of, martyr trying to work through, and then we all meet once a month, and then we talk crap about our departments and how nobody listens to us. It gives us kind of this ability to continue, even though we know that things close to us are kind of against us, but we know that we're not alone. So knowing we have strength in numbers is one of those key things that keeps us able to do something instead of that stopping. So in many organizations, a thing that happens is that the organization starts an initiative and then it kind of dies down, either slowly or very quickly over time. And one of the reasons for that is there is no social motivation to continue. There is no either community of practice, there are no people that support the behavior, or people are feeling alone too much in trying to do that thing. Here's a better table to try to explain this. If I'm trying to understand why someone is doing or not doing something, I can look at the social motivation and say, does the person follow others who spread bad behavior, for example? If I wanted to try to change the behavior of a specific person in an organization, I kind of look at this table that's based on these 6 factors as a checklist. And the checklist basically reminds me to ask these interesting questions. So this person who is not willing to participate in test automation, for example, are there other people that person follows that he believes in that think that automation is a horrible idea? Or does the person believe in the good behavior? It might be that the person came from another project and there they had a really bad experience with test automation. What about group ability? Do people react directly to the person about the bad behavior? So for example, one of the situations I found myself in is that I was in a meeting trying to get a team to try to change some of their practices, and someone in the meeting, one of the people in the team, basically stood up and said, I'm not willing to try it. I think this is a bad idea. And basically when that happens, it's like a negativity bomb inside the room. Because you're trying to work towards something, and if that person is also highly regarded in the team, you also have social motivation working against you. So how do we stop that kind of behavior from happening, from preventing us from moving forward? Well, one of the ways is to see whether people, stand up to a specific behavior. If people are always letting a person take over a conversation, that's one thing that we want to worry about. We want to start teaching people to actually say what they feel, even though they might not agree with a person. So if a person, for example, here's a better example in an enterprise situation. I was consulting for a team, and they said, well, we want to do all these things, but the salespeople always sell so many features in our product that forces us to work crazy hours, and we never have enough time to get out of what we call survival mode. And that's kind of where you never have time to do the right thing, and you never have time to learn how to avoid the right thing. So they're always chasing fires. And I'm asking, well, how come that happens? I mean, when the salespeople sell something, what happens? And then the lead developer there said, well, when they sell something, we work night and day for a few weeks to deliver that specific feature. We burn ourselves and we deliver it. Okay. So I told him, look, if I was that salesperson, why would I change my behavior? It's working perfectly for me. Here I am just selling things, nilly-willy, and it just magically appears in real life. Nobody ever tells me that it's not a good idea, it's not going to work, then I'm burning out the team. Does anyone ever say something to that person? And the answer is no. It just is handed down, and nobody ever thinks about trying to change some of those things. So how do people react to people in a specific situation also matters. So if I'm in that situation, one of the things I want to do is start working with the people around the person to start speaking their mind in a specific way to influence how that person thinks about it. And then we have the last two, environmental, and that's the company. So for example, company motivation, how does the company reward or punish good or bad behavior? So the big question here is, I'm not allowed to deploy to production. Okay, so if I go to the person who is in charge of the production environment, I have to ask myself this question. Is the person going to get more money at the end of the year by not allowing me to deploy to production? Or are they going to get more money at the end of the year by allowing me to deploy to production? Basically, does this hurt their position to change their behavior? Or is the company rewarding the behavior that currently is hurting me? And that's a very important thing. What we'll see later on is that the metrics that we measure people on change their behavior. Because if I'm measuring the operations people on mean time between failures, I'm basically telling them, you're not allowed to fail. And if you fail, you basically get less money at the end of the year because your bonus is going to decrease because you're not living up to a specific failure rate. But if I change the metric to mean time to recovery, I can change the behavior because now failing is not the problem, it's the recovery that becomes the problem. So if I want to change the behavior, I have to understand what does that person gain or not gain from changing their behavior or lose. So the company rewards and punishment is one of those key things that we don't think about, but when we start asking ourselves that question, we realize that if we truly want to change something, that's probably something we're going to have to touch on. And the last one is environmental ability. How far do I have to go to be able to do something in the company from a physical perspective? We want to do pair programming, but all our tables are corner tables, which means there's only room for one person to sit in that table. Anyone ever sit at that table? It's like either round or corner. Everyone sits right at the corner. So if you want to sit next to the person, you have to sit in an angle. So you kind of have to sit and look behind their shoulder just to try to understand what's going on. Or I want to have automated environments and automated deploys, but we don't have the budget to run all the virtual machines that we need to be able to run that kind of operation. That's also a physical limitation in the company because that's a specific budgetary decision. If we want to change the budgetary decision, we have to go back to the people who make the budget and try to understand why do they budget this more than that or not give enough and try to understand that difference. This is the way it looks like in the book. And we're going to use this diagram throughout when we look at real problems in the real world. So this is a checklist, it's not a recipe, which basically means if you're trying to change something, this is not how you change it. What it is something to make sure you don't forget to ask all the right questions. And here's another key important issue here. Sometimes to change a behavior in your organization, you're going to have to be able to change multiple of these. So for the same person, they might, first of all, not believe it's the right thing, they might not have the right skill, and their organization is pushing towards the wrong behavior. So you might have 3 or 4 of these active at the same time. And the only way to change behavior is to fix all of them. They all have to be positive for a behavior to change. It only takes one of them to stop a behavior from happening. That is, if I want a person to do unit testing or do TDD, for example, I want to make sure that none of these things are blocking that person from doing it. It only takes one. And if there are 3 of them, I'll have to work on all 3 of them before that person changes their behavior. Okay. So, if we look at that checklist, let's look at enterprise challenges in that context. So what do we have in an enterprise situation? Enterprise, such a good word, but also such a scary word. We have interdependencies between projects and teams and components. We have monolithic code. We have approval gates. Approval gates are one of those horrible things that we think we cannot change. We have compliance issues. So when I was working for a medical company, imagine what is it like to try to do continuous delivery on an MRI machine. Can you do that? Can you even think about doing that? What is the compliance situation in that case? What's the legal ramification of doing something like this? So I'll leave you with that thought, and we'll move on to that. We have waterfall processes, we have manual and error-prone processes on top of all these things, and usually it's multiple of these things together. So you see the chart on the top right, on the top left. That chart is, we're going to use that green circle to show which influence forces are active for that specific problem. So let's look at the challenges, and what you'll see is that most of the challenges, especially the challenges that we see here, fall squarely in the bottom 2. That is, and now it might start to kind of fall into place, no matter how much you want to be able to change, no matter how much you believe, no matter how much you know and the team around you knows, no matter how much the team around you is motivated to change, these things will prevent the team from actually making a change, which is one of the reasons I think we are also sometimes frustrated working in enterprise situations, because we might be a highly motivated group of individuals, and we all believe in the right thing, and we all even have the knowledge how to do it. And I used to work in a place like this, a big insurance company. And it was me and another person, and we were all like, okay, we'll do continuous integration, and we'll do this, and how do we, oh, no, we don't have access to the production. Okay, but we can do our own, oh, but we don't have access to the, so we need to create a router. And then 3 weeks later, we gave up. We said, okay, that's probably not going to happen. We're going to have to create our own little bubble in the organization. And by the time you've decided to create your own little bubble in the organization where you're going to try to, fake out your own continuous delivery process before you hand it off to the next teams, you've already lost. Because that's a huge anti-pattern. What happens is, in many organizations, is that the technical people decide they've had enough. They don't know how to solve these issues, so they just create a technical bubble. And they say, we'll have a couple of environments locally, and for our project, we're just going to run things through all of these environments, and we're going to have everything fully automated. So in that kind of small bubble, everything is kind of like a paradise. But then there is a thin layer between what that team is doing until they actually have to hand it off to the teams after. And when that gets to the teams after, the process is completely different. Right? The processes become manual again. The deployment has to be repeated. Sometimes compiles are happening again. Sometimes more manual testing is happening. Even though a lot of that stuff has already been done internally, a lot of that stuff is repeated, to the huge frustration of both sides. Because now, not only is there a different process, the two sides have actually grown apart, because one part doesn't actually trust the other. The deployment people feel that the technical people on the dev side don't trust them and don't tell them exactly what's happening, and there might be hiding environments from them, which is sometimes true. It's called shadow DevOps. And on the other side, the people on the dev side feel there is no one to talk to on the other side, which is not necessarily true. But because they've already went ahead and created their own solutions, they don't feel the need to go and explain it to the other side and try to create a concrete solution that works for everyone, because that would require working on the bottom two things here. And nobody knows how to deal with that. Or even worse, people think that there is no way to deal with that. And DevOps is change, because for us, it means changing the assumptions of what we can and cannot do. We also have to change the human behavior to allow this stuff. And the transformation process is one of those places where we kind of fail initially. That's where the beginning of the failure usually happens. And big bang transformation is where a lot of that stuff starts. So in many big organizations, the upper level management decides that there's going to be a transformation period, and we're going to start in May 2016, we're going to finish in June 2018, and it's going to be a fully nice linear line where we move the organization from this part of this way of working to that way of working. And when they go and they announce this big transformation, all the technical and middle management is like, yeah, absolutely. We think this is absolutely going to work, this 2-year change in our company. And then management decides, okay, it's go time. We are announcing the go-ahead for this transformation. And everyone just starts working at the transformation. And people just go, okay, I need to do continuous delivery. You can't. Okay, I need to do automated testing. You can't. Okay, but I need to do that. You can't. You don't have permission. But I need to do this. But the compliance doesn't allow it. Okay. And then we get to this situation. Okay. We start, there's fear, panic sets in, and very, very quickly, the decision to either abort in a partial way or to abort completely. And in many organizations, that's where the problem is. We're trying to boil the ocean. We're trying to eat the elephant whole. We're trying to do a lot of different metaphors that would fit the situation. But it's almost impossible. So one of the best ways to start in that kind of transformation is to do pilot projects. And the reason pilot projects are important is because one of the reasons that they work is because they take care of one of the first problems, is that the teams and the organization doesn't have the technical knowledge and the ability to even work in a technical fashion that allows continuous delivery. But it also allows for other behaviors to start changing just for that specific pilot team. So when we create a pilot team, an application, let's see if that works. Doesn't work? We have integration problem here. Nope. Here. Okay. So when we start with a pilot team, one of the nicest things about a pilot team is, let's see if that works now. Okay. So one of the nicest things about a pilot team is that a pilot team represents much less risk to the organization, which means that it's much more likely that people are going to be able to change the behavior for a specific team instead of for the entire organization. And in application pilot, usually you would choose a specific set of people or a project that does represent a real project in your company that you would want to try this on. You gather a set of people and you basically create a continuous delivery team made of cross-functional people from all across the organization. And it's very important to support that team from multiple sides. For example, if we only do a one-sided adoption, for example, we only bring in the technical people, what's going to happen is that the technical side is going to create a bubble, but the organizational side is not going to be able to support it. If we only start with the leadership side, but we don't let the technical people know about these changes, then the managerial or process side is going to ask the technical teams for things that they're not ready to deliver. And maybe you've seen this. If you've been to organizations or teams where the management declares, we're going agile, you guys, from now on, we're going to lock you in a room, we're going to see you in 2 weeks, good luck, I'll see you in 14 days. And then you come back after 2 weeks, and the team is basically starving. They have nothing to deliver. They're like, we have no idea what we're supposed to do because they don't have the right skills, they don't have the right training, they don't have the right, basically, ability to manage themselves. So they're treating teams as self-organizing, but the teams don't have the skill to self-organize yet. So one-sided adoption is a huge problem. We need bi-directional support. We need both process to support it, and we need the technical teams to support it. If only one of them actually takes care of the problem, we're going to have a huge issue, because we're going to have kind of either the process is going to be declared, kind of mission accomplished, even though nothing works. And if you've ever been to agile projects which are completely not agile, that would be an example of that, where you talk to the C-level executive, oh yeah, we're doing iterations, and we're using SAFe, we're doing all that stuff. But when you go into the technical level, you realize that it's the same chaos that existed before. So the SAFe and all these layers above, they're only at the process level, but the technical teams don't have the right skills to automate things, to put the right things in priority, to negotiate the right things. It's still very top level. It's still waterfall agile in many ways, because there isn't really a working together between the technical teams and managerial teams. One of the key points in this is that if the organization doesn't allow in policy to allow for that team to do continuous delivery, then that team is going to fail. So policy is basically how the organization decides that they're allowed to do something. By the way, I don't have a clock here, so everyone here, when there's 10 minutes left, I want you to go like this. I know it's kind of crazy, but I need to know a visual sign, 10 minutes left, okay? Can I trust you? You, specifically? Is it okay? Thank you, okay. So, when we're talking about policy change, what is the policy change in this case? So let's take a standard DevOps flow. On the top side, we have development or code for product. We have commit stage. We have validation, application deployment. At the bottom, we have a parallel flow, a parallel pipeline, where we have commit and build for the infrastructure where the application will be deployed. We have validation of that infrastructure, and we have the deployment of that infrastructure. And these two work in tandem. They're basically two pipelines that get merged into the same pipeline where you run the acceptance tests and you do the production deploys the same way. So that's the standard DevOps flow, and that's usually where you want to aim when you're doing kind of continuous delivery. But what happens in the real world is you show this diagram to management, and management says, this all looks good and well, up until kind of that third or second box from the right. I'm okay with you up until there, and then you're not allowed to do anything else. And that's where the policy and compliance comes in. That's where the rules actually need to change for that team. So what is recommended is that when you're building that pilot team, when you're trying to do one team that tries to do continuous delivery in that organization for one of the components or one of the products, that team has to have policy support. And what is policy support? Basically, it means that we create a parallel policy team or compliance team. Some people call it Tiger team. And the point of that Tiger team is to kind of get together the legal people and the policy people and the security people, and they have to get together and create an exception in the policy, in the organization, for that pilot team. Okay? So the rest of the organization continues working as regular, as usual, but for that team, their job is to create a policy that both lives up to the standards that the organization has, but supports continuous delivery. So we're talking about building a continuous delivery policy. For example, a security person might say, well, today, to say that the application is secure before we deploy to production, I do this check, and I run this script. And it has to be in this environment. But for this committee, given that we have this script, and I know that the script checks all of these things that I check manually, if the script says it's okay, I'm okay with it. That's basically kind of a signature on there. And once that script is approved by that security person, that script can be put into the pipeline. So the script is part of the deployment pipeline, and there's actually going to be a compliance step or a policy step in the pipeline when deploying to specific environments. And the same thing for compliance. For example, if I need to know that these specific documents have been checked, or that these specific tests have been run and passing, or that all of these things are true, and I can find a way to automate it, and 99% of the time there is a way to automate it because it's not an art. It is literally going in and checking that something is true or false. It's going in and verifying the specific text exists. It's going in and verifying, for example, for a website, that a website is colorblind friendly, right? I can check that manually, or I can have a script that checks it. I can verify that a website lives to a governmental standard of page size. I can build scripts that test that stuff. So the point of that committee is to create an exception policy for that pilot team that will allow them to go to production in a continuous fashion as an exception. And once that works, and it might take a month or two, sometimes more, when that works, the team tries that policy, and they try to do continuous integration for real in that exact organization. And that takes care of the bottom two things right there, because that's where the problem is. This is what's allowed or not allowed. This is the physical environment and contractual environment. And once the team is able to do that, then we can say, okay, for that specific team in that specific type of project in this organization, this is what we had to go through. So that team is going to suffer the most out of all the future teams. But next, we might have to do another pilot with a different type of project. If that was a web project, now we might have an infrastructure project or internal project or anything like that. And we would continue doing these pilots for multiple types of projects to make sure that the policy exceptions for that type of project, we can build them in incremental fashion, which is, again, basically part of this work is to not stop and not to take all the risks. And once we have that, we can basically say, okay, if we can do all of these projects with these exceptions, why don't we try to apply the exceptions to more and more projects until at some point the exception becomes the accepted rule and the old rules become the exception. So we can have teams onboarding themselves. Imagine that you had a website internally in the company, and this is basically one of the ways to do it. Instead of you going, if you have 1,000 different products or projects in your company, you can't go to each one of them and say, now you will do continuous delivery. No, you put up a point of entry, which basically a team can go and say, we want to become more continuous delivery oriented. We go to an internal wiki website. The wiki basically shows us the policies that we can use to go to production. And if none of them matches, it means we need to do another pilot. But the point is that a team can onboard itself as long as it lives up to specific rules, scripts, and practices. And pipeline templates can be created that check basically the same rules with parameters. And this is the way forward for these large organizations. I don't see any other way but involving the people who make the rules, because that's where we usually stop. Another thing that we want to change is the end-to-end view. If we want to be able to change DevOps mindset, we have to measure the right things. And one of the best ways to measure is to look at the end-to-end cycle. So this is a value stream. The value stream starts, in this case, with a request, and it ends with a deploy. And we can measure the time it takes for each of these steps, as well as the time that we're waiting or the time that we're wasting for each of these steps. So it might take me 3 hours to do a deployment, but it's an 8-hour average because I have to wait a day until I know that the deployment is okay. So in that case, that's 5 hours of waste, okay? If the third thing, or if approval takes 1 hour, but I still have to wait a whole day to know if something was approved, because things are approved in bulk, then I have a waste of 7 hours, basically. Hey, you see? Okay. So one of these important things to remind ourselves is that when we look at DevOps change, we need to look at the big picture. Because when we try to change something, we want to see whether we're actually making a difference. And you see the 15% there? That's basically how much waste we have versus how much actual work we have. And when I go to teams that want to do DevOps transformations, the first thing we ask is, what's your value stream like? How long does it take you to deliver something from the point, if you put a GoPro camera on your feature, and the GoPro camera basically is just on that specific feature, what does that feature see? Well, I'm sitting there, and then someone is working on it, and then I'm sitting there, and something else is working on it, and overall, it takes me 3 months to get to production. So even though your company may be deploying every 2 weeks, the thing you're deploying might be 3 months old, and that's the feedback loop. That's the real feedback loop. And when we're trying to do DevOps and DevOps metrics, we want to make sure that the feedback loop gets shorter. And that's the thing that we eventually want to influence. This is kind of what it might look like in an Excel file that I usually work with. And you can actually have a meeting with the people across the board for that specific project to measure all the handoffs between the teams and basically create a value stream that measures the time it takes to deliver each and everything. If we don't have that number, we don't know if we actually make the difference. Here are some other metrics that could be creating a problem for you. If your organization says, we need to get better coverage of our code, and that's how people are measured, you're going to end up exactly with what you're measuring. You're going to get covered code, but not necessarily code that works. So I've been part of those organizations. I've been part of those projects where the team lead will come in and say, okay, the other teams have gone up by 20% coverage this month. We have to be better. And then eventually, this conversation comes in. I think I know a way to get the coverage really high. Two developers whisper among themselves. We just create a loop with reflection and just execute all of these things. We get 20% code coverage like that. We don't need an assert, because that's not what's being measured. And a lot of teams, unfortunately, go to those routes and basically give us exactly what we're asking for. So the coverage metric doesn't actually mean anything without code reviews. I always tell that to teams, that coverage, 100% coverage doesn't mean anything. 10% code coverage means something. It means you're definitely missing tests. But 100% doesn't mean anything because I need to see your code. So the code review is a big part of those things. So when we use metrics, coverage is a problematic one to use. So coverage is always suspect. And I'm okay with red. Red basically means how many red builds do I have? I'm okay with having red builds because builds can fail, and builds failing are basically a feedback mechanism. I want to know that my build failed. If my build never fails, something is wrong. It means either I'm afraid to push changes into the master branch, or I'm actually not running that build and I'm deploying from something else. Something might be wrong. Here's another one. Mean time to failure versus mean time to recovery. It's much better to measure this. How long does it take from one red build to the first green one? Because that will give you a measure of how much the team cares about red builds. I don't care how many red builds I have, I just care how long they exist. Because basically, the time between greens is the time that it takes to fix a red one. And if it takes me a long time and it gets longer, it means that the team is seeing a red build and it's either very difficult to fix or or people don't care about it. Thank you. Okay, so in conclusion, there are quite a bit of challenges that we can map towards specific values. And in those challenges, we can look at influence forces and try to change the behavior of people. And I really believe that behavior between people is one of those key differences that can make or break a good transformation. So before we finish, I usually get kind of worked up about that stuff. I actually wanted to do, a short song just about transformations. It's been a few good years since I did that, but I thought I wrote a song specific for this conference. But for that song, I need a volunteer. Not someone to sing, but I need someone to come in and actually help me press space when the words change on the screen. Do I have a volunteer? And, oh, thank you. Sir, what's your name? Tomer. Tomer. We don't know each other, right, Tomer? We kind of do. We kind of do. Okay, so why don't you come in, please? But we did not practice this, I promise you. Okay, thank you. Okay, so first of all, don't touch anything yet, okay? First rule of DevOps. Don't touch anything. Okay. Let's see if this works. Let's see, do I have a paper with all the words? Did you bring it? He has no idea. Okay, okay. Let's see if this works. So can you guys hear the guitar? And girls too? Okay. Before we do the song, I want to do a quick integration test for you, okay? Just to see how you're doing. So when I finish the words on the slide, you press space. Okay? Ready? Let's do it. Yeah, yeah. Okay, you ready? Okay. This is a test line. Looks like you're doing just fine. A bit faster. It's time for a song of mine. Okay, perfect. Okay, so, not yet. Okay. So some context about this song. It's a song I wrote specifically for this conference. It's a song about transformation. Actually, it's a song about transformation that went wrong. And this is, represents some of the feelings that I've had in that transformation. I was just a team lead back then. I was not a consultant or anything like that. Okay. Not yet. Okay, let's go. So this is a transformation song. Hit it. It's a human sign when transformations go wrong. It wasn't supposed to end like this, but now it's taking so long. No integration, no unit tests. Nobody's looking at the pipelines. Everybody's depressed. Cold, cold, cloud, and empty queues. Nobody ever deletes the containers. Now Jira's locked out too. So we must sacrifice so we can finish in time. We just have to be ready. It's a victimless crime. Yes, we must sacrifice. Quality would have been so nice. I guess we must pay the price. That's all. Start of new project. Everything's looking great. This time we're gonna make it, baby. We're just one day late. We can deploy to production or any test VM. Did you send out an email? What's the time in Vietnam? Cold, cold Slack and chat rooms. Guess we have to wait, so maybe try tomorrow at noon. So we sacrifice so we can finish in time. We just have to be ready. Another victimless crime. We must sacrifice. Quality would have been so nice, but I guess we must pay the price again. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, sir. Thank you. So, I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you at the next talks. Cheers.